City of Portland Planning Commission meeting. I am the chair, Mary Reno Mera. I'm joined here in person by Vice Chair Pouncil, Commissioner Lang, Commissioner Patel, and online we have Commissioner Spivak, and who else is joining us virtually? Commissioner Routh and Vice Chair Thompson. Thank you, Patricia. So with that, I will open it up for any items of interest from commissioners. Go ahead, Vice Chair Pouncil.
Okay. Just a quick announcement update. There will be a climate horror Halloween party at Green Anchor in North Portland on October 27th from 3 to 10. There's a 3 to 6 family, kids and family time. So there will be trick-or-treating, pumpkin carving, and an education on all things Willamette River and what horrors awaits it. So we'd love to have a community to come and be a part of that.
I have a question. Is that on Halloween?
Yeah.
It's on.
Is it on Halloween itself, or
it's
is
on
it
the
sometimes
27th.
things are backed up a day to get a weekend?
Yeah, it's on October 27th. That's a Friday.
Where?
At Green Anchor, which is next to Cathedral Park. And I can give you that exact address.
I'll say it's a part of Portland. If you haven't been there, you definitely got to see it.
Yes. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a good time.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Pouncil, for that announcement. Any other items from commissioners? Okay, moving on to Director's Report. Patricia.
Good evening, Chair O'Mara, Commissioners, Patricia Diefenderfer, for the record, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I just wanted to do a quick check on sound. Are the folks joining virtually? Can you hear us okay? Yeah, great. Okay. So just a couple of things. Wanted to let the Commission know about a couple of opportunities for some participation in some other kind of Commission working group opportunities. So we have this bureau. The city requires that all bureaus have a budget advisory committee that helps guide the budget process. And so each year we stand up a budget advisory committee, and we often like to extend an invitation to the Planning Commission to have a representative of the Planning Commission on the budget advisory committee. So that's one option. And I know based on our bylaws that we developed collectively with this new commission, there was a desire to sort of take a vote and see, have a discussion about who would be interested and take a vote to, I guess, nominate the person who would represent the commission. So we don't have to pick the person necessarily today, but just wanted to let you know this opportunity. And we could have the commission, take a vote on that at the next meeting, if there's a desire and interest on the behalf of any member of the commission to participate in the budget advisory committee. So that's one opportunity wanted to put out there. The other is the Bureau staff have developed a collaborative working group consisting of external stakeholders interested in issues related to the economic opportunities analysis. So this group has already had one meeting, but we would very much like to invite a commissioner, if there's interest among the commissioners, for someone to represent the commission on that group and just to participate in those meetings and that process. There are scheduled about 6 to 7 meetings for that working group that would take place essentially from now until the beginning of the year, kind of January timeframe next year. And so any person, any commissioner who might be interested in participating in this collaborative working group, we just ask that you are able to make as many of the meetings as possible. And those meetings are going to be sequenced about every 3 weeks on Friday mornings for about 2.5 hours. So a meeting that would be from 10 to 12:30, on Fridays for a number of meetings. So that opportunity, we do have a meeting coming up this coming Friday. So do want to, if there is interest among any commissioner to participate in that, it might be good if we could pick that person this evening and then have invite that person to join this coming Friday, 2 days from now, and then subsequent meetings. So apologies for the late ask on that. But that's what I have. So I just wanted to put those opportunities out there.
Thank you, Patricia. Do we have commissioners interested in the economic opportunities group, which is the more immediate opportunity, correct, Patricia? I see Commissioner Routh and Vice Chair Pouncil.
I actually have a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead with your question.
Is that for the EOA, the Economic Opportunities Analysis?
It is for the EOA. Yes,
Okay.
this is an external group. There was a group of individuals that were convened as part of a process team that helped sort of develop both the roster of individuals who are on the collaborative working group and helped design the process a little bit that collaborative working group would follow. And so it is a place to get stakeholder input very early in the process on the economic opportunities analysis.
When do you need an answer or need to have someone say yes? Or
So
I don't want to say yes right now, basically.
Yeah.
So.
well, there's another commissioner with their hand up, so maybe we could. But it is this opportunity. We do have a meeting on Friday.
Oh, okay.
So we would love to be able to leave here today with, if there's interest, with knowing who that individual would be.
Go ahead, Commissioner Routh.
Hey, I expressed interest when this first came up a couple of years ago. I'm still interested. I'm also happy, like Commissioner Pouncil, if you are 100% on it, I'm happy to cede. But
No, Commissioner Rao. Congratulations.
Okay, I think that's an assignment. Maybe I spoke too soon. Vice Chair Thompson.
Oh, I was just going to nominate Commissioner Routh and see if there was a second towards her.
Yeah, I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. Congratulations, Commissioner Routh. And Patricia, on the Budget Advisory Committee, when do you need a selection?
Chair O'Mara, that we can hold off on that until the next meeting. There's not as much of a time sensitivity there. We usually don't convene that group until much later in the fall.
Okay.
I want to say, it could be November or it could even be early December. So we can definitely do that next meeting.
Okay. And if there are questions about that committee from commissioners, can they reach out to you before the next meeting?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on with our next item of business. It is the consent agenda, consideration of minutes from our September 12th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. And are we actually approving did we have a meeting in late September? Is that the correct date? September 12th? Okay.
We had a September 26th.
Okay. My
meeting.
notes say the 12th, but my memory was telling me otherwise.
You're absolutely right,
September
Commissioner.
26th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
And I'm happy to second Commissioner Routh, and I'll just share that the consideration of minutes for September 12th is what is published on the October 10th. So, Chair O'Meara, you're correct in both instances.
Thank you.
Chair O'Meara. One thing on the minutes, when I was going through it, Commissioner Spivak mentioned the 3-year review process. And I remember they talked about the timing of when this was going to come up for a review, but it wasn't in the presentation notes. I looked back in my notes and I didn't have it either. Should that timing, it was brought up when Commissioner Spivak was making some comments, but within the presentation, we didn't note the timing of when that was going to be reviewed and then done again on the analysis.
Oh, sorry. Pardon me. Patricia Diefenhofer for the record. Commissioner Lang, you're speaking of the interval to update, to look at the housing needs analysis?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't, I mean, it's up to you if you want to correct the minutes on that. I don't think that, I mean, that was just, staff's, that's when we believe we will, the intervals at which we will be doing it. I don't think there's I'm going to defer to Tom to speak to if that's a requirement or not, but I know that's a practice we want to institute.
Yeah, this is all new, coming down from state, from the DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation. It's our understanding that it's 3 years from this December when council adopts the HNA, that, we'll be back here fall of 2027 with a progress report on what we see going on.
Are you okay with that response, or would you like to request a correction
Yeah, I
to
think
the
it just made
minutes?
the minutes for this meeting. So
There you
I
go.
think we're good.
Documented.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to proceed to a vote for the approval of the minutes from the September 26, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries. Next up, we have a continuation of the housing needs analysis. We're joined by Tom Armstrong, Ariel Kane, Sam Brickham. Welcome. This is a continued hearing and work session from the September 26th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. So I'll hand it over to Tom and team for a brief staff review and presentation, and then we do have one person signed up to testify. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We have just a brief presentation for you this evening to bring back some of the issues that came up at the September 26th meeting, to report back to you. And then as Chair O'Meara said, there is some testimony, and then we have two other time for you to deliberate and talk about and discuss further what's in the HNA, what you might want to elevate to council to be part of the housing production strategy. And then finally this evening, we have staff from the Portland Housing Bureau to come and report back on the inclusionary housing calibration study, which came up in our previous meeting as well. So just a reminder that the action before you is making a recommendation to City Council to repeal the old housing needs analysis, adopt the new one, repeal the residential portions of the 2015 buildable land inventory, and adopt a new residential buildable land inventory. And as a reminder, both of these documents are what we call supporting documents, the factual basis that goes into the comprehensive plan. So this is technically an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and it goes to council and they adopt it. We then send these documents on to DLCD for their review and acknowledgement that we comply with state rules. I wanted to begin tonight just with sort of a reminder and a recap of sort of what informs our approach to this work, and a lot of that is founded in the comprehensive plan, and specifically in Chapter 5, which is where our housing goals and policies are embedded. Next slide, please. And just to recap that we are planning for growth, despite population losses over the last couple of years. We are optimistic about Portland and the region, and continuing to grow here. So we are planning for growth, and we're also, again, coming from the policies, we're planning for increasing diversity. We're planning for an aging population. We are seeking to maintain our income diversity, and we'll get into a little bit of that this evening, which means we want to encourage a wide range of housing choices. And you've seen and heard about many of our actions over the last 5 or 6 years that have been aimed at that. Projects like the residential infill project, basically opening up the traditional single-family neighborhoods to a wider range of housing types that are at different affordability points, suit different lifestyle needs. I think the other couple of things, and this came up last time, we are, one of our guiding principles and one of our clear policies goals here is around healthy, connected neighborhoods, having access to daily needs and services, and to that end, we use that as one of the lens or filters that we look at. How are we going to grow in the future? And right now, about 64% of our future growth capacity is in our existing complete neighborhoods, which tells us if we're going to meet our goals for the city, which is 80% of Portland households are in healthy, connected neighborhoods, we need to invest and create more healthy, connected neighborhoods. At the same time, we're encouraging more development in those existing complete neighborhoods. The other issue that came up last time, we began to get into questions about displacement and economic vulnerability. We'll get more into this as part of the housing production strategy, where we look at where growth is occurring and sort of who we're planning for and how we can encourage the right housing types. But as of right now, only about 42% of our future growth capacity are in what we would call economically vulnerable areas of Portland. And that's based on that economic vulnerability analysis, which is the combination of 5 factors that represent the most vulnerable Portlanders: the people of color, people that are cost burden households, lower income households, and people without college degrees. With that sort of framing policy framework, I'm going to turn things over to Sam, who's going to talk a little bit more about we heard a lot of testimony, especially from Portland Neighbors Welcome, about the Inner East Side and increasing housing opportunity in the Inner East Side. So we thought we would bring some more information back to you to provide a little bit wider context for that proposal. I will note that is something that we at BPS have identified also as a need. It's part of our strategic plan to sort of revisit that part of town for a future area planning project similar to the one that you're going to hear later tonight, the Lower Southeast Rising project. But Sam has some information that will provide a little bit more context from where that Portland Neighbors Welcome testimony is coming from.
Ooh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, first of all, just acknowledging that testimony and providing a quick update, an overview around that proposal for the Inner East Side. The Inner East Side, according to the Portland Neighbors Welcome proposal, actually extends up to Fremont. It's bordered by Fremont to the north, Powell to the south, 12th all the way to 60th. So it's a large area. And in that specific area, in terms of our overall capacity per our buildable lands inventory analysis that we've recently conducted, that currently accounts for about 10% of our total capacity. So you can see here that most of that capacity within this area is clustered along our arterials, Sandy, Belmont, Hawthorne Division, as well as sort of pockets here and there. That is, again, it's similar to what we have seen in terms of our sort of overall distribution in terms of capacity clustering currently as zoned along our corridors and our centers. What you'll see is a relative lack of activity or capacity in the neighborhoods outside of those corridors, and that's really a function of zoning and development feasibility, and I'm going to get into both of those things here. So here's a map, a simplified map of our multi-dwelling and mixed-use zoning along those corridors. So you can see it really quite heavily aligns with where we've seen capacity, and you can see, you know, in the middle of those, in the neighborhoods where we have majority R5 and R2.5 zoning, there wasn't really a lot of capacity in those areas generally. Again, 90% of our citywide capacity is in multi-dwelling and mixed-use zoning, so it pretty much aligns with what we see citywide. And even within this area, we do have a lot of capacity in those mixed-use and multi-dwelling zones. So just to highlight, dig into sort of those more neighborhood scale zones, those R5, R2.5. Here you have a middle housing map, or a map of the middle housing permits after the first year of the residential infill project, and you can see there's really a dearth of projects in that Inner East Side area. Most of them are clustered in that kind of middle crescent, if you would, north of Fremont, south of Powell, and mostly in sort of outer southeast and middle southeast, and in those northern areas. Again, that's really a function of development feasibility and where a middle housing developer could realistically purchase property and still have a viable project. So I do want to dig into that a little bit here on the next slide. It might take a little bit of explaining, but essentially what I've shown here is the amount of money, the amount that a developer could purchase a 5,000 square foot lot for each of the housing prototypes that we have in our buildable land inventory model in the Belmont Hawthorne Division plan area. So one of the plan areas in that Inner East Side. That land budget is roughly less than $450,000 for any of the middle housing prototypes, right? So fourplex is $440,000. So what that means is a developer could spend up to $440,000 and still have an economically viable project if they were going after a fourplex. The problem we have in the Inner East Side in those neighborhoods is you can't. That property doesn't exist really, not really. And you see the median single-family home price in that Inner East Side area, or that plan area specifically, is $700,000. So we're way off, and that's really why you see that the limited activity, the low activity of middle housing permits in that inner east side area. On the flip side, you could spend a lot more money. You could spend as a developer on land and still have an economically viable, higher density product like a podium apartment, a 5/1 apartment. Generally speaking, land budget does increase. When I say land budget, I'm talking about the residual land value, and that does generally increase with density. So this really demonstrates the challenge of getting middle housing development in those kind of inner east side single dwelling zones. And the last thing I'll say about this is these numbers, this model is based on, again, kind of probably a rosier outlook than is what we have currently, simply because we are modeling over a 25-year time horizon and trying to account for some sort of market stabilization. So the numbers here are probably actually lower than what you have, but lower in reality, but still. What this shows is it's a very difficult environment to develop middle housing in those neighborhood zones. Do you have anything to add to that, Tom?
No.
Okay. In that case, I'll pass back to Tom.
The other topic that came up at our last meeting was about the sort of previous forecasts and the previous planning effort and how that was tracking, why it's not working, or why we still find ourselves in an affordability crisis. And so I brought back a little bit of information from the previous planning efforts. Next slide, please. So there are sort of two phases of that early work. We did a housing needs analysis in 2011 that was based on a 2007 Metro forecast. And then we updated that in the 2015 growth scenarios report. And I believe we sent you an excerpt of that as part of your agenda packet for tonight's meeting. And those two sort of forecasts, in this table compared to where we currently are. And you can see they're relatively similar in terms of planning for future growth that's 20 to 25 years out. The annual production numbers increase. It depends on are we counting that over 20 years or 25 years? But we've seen that sort of target number increase, and at the same time, again, all along we've recognized that a significant portion of existing Portlanders have relatively lower incomes, and that we continue to try and plan for maintaining that income diversity through our planning efforts. Next slide, please. So now we get a little bit more into why isn't this working, and one thing that when we sort of run out that 2015 forecast out to 2035, and we look at our actual production from 2010 to 2022, we're pretty close, a little bit under. But I think the key difference here is that back then we were planning for future households and a little bit of a vacancy factor. But now, we've sort of realized the error of our ways, both at the state level, the regional level, and we're implementing it here at the city, to really look back and look at the underproduction, the difference between households and housing units, to factor in the houseless population, to factor in more of the second home, vacation homes that we've seen, to really plan for more, and to really sort of, again, that increasing target. next slide, please. You know, the other factor I think that we did not see in these earlier forecasts, and you see the two forecasts. Well, you see that this is the forecast that the 2015 growth scenarios report was based on, and that's the left and the right columns on this chart. That what we experienced in the middle was a lot more growth in the higher income households. That, you know, Metro and we were planning for 20% of the future growth to be in those upper income categories. And we wound up with half of our growth in those upper income categories. And I think that's really what has put a crunch and an upward pressure on prices and rents, when half the people coming to Portland is looking for looking for housing. That really changes the market, and it especially changes the market on the sort of home ownership, single family home side, because that's not what we're able to build, right? 90% of our capacity is in the multi-dwelling mixed use building form. We just are not creating a lot of new single family homes. It's a scarce resource of limited supply. You have a lot of affluent households, they're going to bid up the price on that. And so I think that's one of the dynamics that we're seeing play out in the marketplace here. To dig a little bit deeper, I'm going to turn things over to Ariel, who's going to talk a little bit more about the sort of what's going on in the region and the regional forecast and regional underproduction and how that plays with what's going on in Portland.
Great, thank you. So this is, as Tom said, in response to some of the questions and testimony we had from Planning Commission last time, just to contextualize the forecast as well as the need regionally. So when we look at this, this is the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis draft methodology that DLCD and OHCS produced with their consulting partners, where they did a regional analysis of the 20-year projected need, as well as the vacation home replacement, underproduction, and the units to address houselessness statewide. So we applied that methodology down to our jurisdictional level, and that's down at the bottom for comparison. So as we presented to you last time, we estimate that Portland has underproduction of units around 9,385. That's about, I think, a third. Sorry, I didn't actually do the math, but of the Metro forecast of underproduction of 33,000, which is proportional to our population and household share within the region. And you can see that Portland also takes up about 22% of the estimated total forecast for the state of Oregon, as well as Metro being about 48% of the forecast for the state. But just to also contextualize this is still just looking at 2010 underproduction to 2021. So we know that there are factors that went into underproduction over a greater period of time than just the last 10 or 11 years. But that's just the basis of this analysis. And then on the next slide, there are just some other points, some other questions that came up that don't really fit into the other two things that Tom and Sam presented on, but add some more context to sort of why we're here with the housing need that we do have. So just doing a simple analysis of ACS data, if we just look at 2010, 2021, simply we grew another 1,131 more households than we produced units in Portland. And that trend is also similar across the MSA. So we saw an estimated 9,000 more households than units produced across the entire Portland metro region. So a little bit less than that third share of that 33,000 that we're predicting we have underproduced generally, but still substantial underproduction looking at a straight household formation to unit production. There were a lot of questions last time about vacancy as well. So just an estimated 17,000 housing units are currently vacant with a vacancy rate of about 5.6%. This is down from, I think, around 7.9% that we saw in 2010, which just indicates that we have a tighter market right now. We have less vacant units available overall. And to sort of contextualize the vacant for seasonal and recreational use, that's about 14% of those vacant units are estimated to be for second or vacation home use per the census data. Additionally, we have been seeing rents increasing. I'm sure people are familiar. So from 2010 to 2021, with that inflation adjustment, we saw rents increased by about 39% across the median, whereas median mortgage costs increased just 3% from that same time period, a substantial difference. And then cost burden renter households, we also saw an increase not just in share, but in number. We saw an increase of about 6,000 cost burden renter households. Renter households become cost burdened by about 6,700, while we saw a decrease the other direction for homeowners. We saw a decrease of about 10,700 homeowners from the cost burden sort of category, and that cost burden is 30% or more of your income being spent on housing costs. And then lastly, just to touch on short-term rentals, we spoke with folks at the Bureau of Revenue Services, who also collects data around short-term rentals and differently than Bureau of Development Services. So we have an estimated 4,000 short-term rentals that are tax collecting purposes have been registered and are paying taxes, whereas the BDS permit registration, which is largely used for inspection and compliance, is, I think we had talked about last time, less than 1,000 units are part of that. And
I will just say on the short-term rentals, again, we don't have a lot of good data to know, what would be a viable standalone housing unit that could be available for long-term rental versus an extra bedroom that somebody's renting out in their house. But it gives you a sense of just, it's not a lot. There's not a lot, to be squeezed out of there in terms of long-term housing. And it just provides a scale there. I think that's sort of concludes what we had to report back to you this evening. So maybe take testimony, and then you can begin your deliberations, and we can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate all of the follow-up from the discussion and testimony and questions that we had at our last commission meeting. We do have one person signed up to testify, and I believe that's virtually on the housing needs analysis.
Testify.
Joyce Del Rosario, I believe, was the one.
Yes.
Is Joyce here with us in person? Okay. Well, it looks like we do not have our one testifier here. So I will be closing the public testimony for the housing needs analysis. And we
Pardon,
can...
Chair O'Meara, just to clarify for the record that we're closing both the written and oral testimony.
Correct. Closing both the written and the oral testimony for the housing needs analysis for the record. And with that, we can open it up for commissioner questions, comments, and discussion with staff.
Yeah, Commissioner Lang, for the record, could you, I know you've done this for us, but can you kind of walk us through the steps of this process after what happens tonight? Where does it go, and where's it headed, I guess?
Sure. So after tonight, we'll come back at your next meeting and you'll take a formal vote on a recommendation to council. And you will send a recommendation letter to council. And that's why we said that is this all along, this needs analysis sets up the production strategy. What are you going to do about it to realize all this growth capacity out there, and to hit our production targets. And that discussion will go through the spring and summer of 2024. So your transmittal letter is an opportunity to raise issues to council, like, we think these are important issues that the production strategy should address. So that's the immediate, sort of, you can begin to flag issues this evening, and we can help draft a transmittal letter, and then in 2 weeks you'll come back and vote on if that's this, however that set of recommendations is to council. Council.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I apologize. I thought you were done, Tom. I was just going to clarify that the commission will make a recommendation to council, and then there's a council will adopt the housing needs analysis. I think we have a December council date.
Yes.
So that's the kind of the end of the road for the housing needs analysis. And then what Tom was describing, that concurrently, we're also identifying those actions that will comprise the housing production strategy, and that process is still ongoing. But the deadline to do the housing needs analysis is I think by the end of the year. It's coming upon us, so that's why we're eager to get the commission's recommendation on this stage, this document in this part of the process. And then of course there'll be future opportunity for the commission to provide input on the housing production strategy.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I guess the initial question I have is if any changes or modifications to the actual report are intended based on the feedback that we've heard through either testimony or deliberations in this group. Are we talking about the letter as the only opportunity for the Planning Commission to highlight or emphasize, etc., some of the points that we've heard, or is there actually an opportunity to make modifications?
I will say technically yes, you can make modifications to the report, but as Patricia just said, we are sort of up against this deadline of getting to council in December. And we also have the opportunity through the housing production strategy to do more analysis, to bring more of that insight to that strategy discussion. And so I think it would be our preference that any sort of future data analysis, that we add that more to the housing production strategy work program, than to try and do it, say, in the next 2 weeks and bring back an amendment analysis package that you would vote to include in the production strategy.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I guess, barring the timeline limitation that we have here and understanding that, a lot of work has gone into this already, I would advocate for maybe making some adjustments, at least to the executive summary or to the first few pages of the document, that highlight and emphasize some of the themes that I think do exist in the document, but are a little bit obscured or just not as powerful as they could be. When I looked at the report, the first few pages, it's like, we need 120,000. We have room for like almost twice that, 235, whatever the number is. One of the first statements of like the takeaways is like, we have more than enough. And while all of that is true, I think that what we've all been discussing is that where those units occur, what that capacity looks like in detail really matters for the ability of the added units to live up to the goals and vision that we've set forth. And earlier, I mean, you talked about how 64% of that potential growth is in complete communities, and we need to reach the goal of 80%. I mean, I think for the purposes of this report, like, let's aim for like even higher, you know, but what does that do to that overall capacity number? When we look at things like displacement risk, and that was a question that I had sent along to staff, I think over the weekend or a few days ago, is just trying to better understand how that was acknowledged, just displacement risk with areas that have more naturally occurring affordable housing now. And if we're assuming a lot of development potential there, that could have some negative consequences. And so if you put that overlay onto that gross number of 235,000, what other things? I mean, there's heat island issues, there's air quality issues. So I guess that I'm not asking you to go like get all of that data, but I'm just wondering how that message could be brought forth more clearly outside of just a letter to council, which I feel like doesn't have the same strength or live on. I mean, yes, it's a way for us to communicate something now, but I mean, we've been talking about all of this, and if it really is important to understanding the baseline data analysis that's eventually going to drive the how, the implementation, like, can we capture that a little bit more, you know, forcefully or clearly upfront in this document?
Yeah, I think especially those initial issues that you were identifying, that especially that are the ones that are already in the document, we can do like you're asking, elevate those into the executive summary. The other issues like urban heat island and resiliency, you know, those were analyses that we were looking already to do as part of the production strategy. So I would sort of push those off to that phase of it. But anything that's already in the document, it's easy for us to elevate into the executive summary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be great. That would be my recommendation. If there's a way to, with the data that you already have, provide a number or shed some light on, yes, there is technically this capacity of 235,000 units, but when you consider XYZ, you know, that number starts to look a lot different. And then maybe just add the point, you know, that these additional considerations will be done as part of the housing production strategy. So if people are trying to like link the two, and, you know, in my brain, I was initially thinking about this being the data and then the production strategy is the how. Well, that is kind of true, but it sounds like there's also some analysis and, you know, detail that will be arrived at through the production strategy. And so I think just identifying some of those potential areas for study, I would be interested to see. So I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Spivak, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess for the housing needs assessment, the one item which it's possible it's in there and I missed it, but I'd love to see a little bit of information on the size of households in Portland, because I think that's an important data point to know as we start looking at what sorts of housing we want to plan for in the housing performance stage. And then the other one thing, just in the slides today, I don't know if it's possible to be current, but there's some information about the cost burden of homeowners versus renters, the cost burden going down. I'm sure that still is the case, but interest rates have gone up a lot since that time period, such that it feels like cost burden for homeowners is substantially more than it was in 2020, 21. So if there's anything in the report that just feels a little bit dated with the rise of interest rates, that might be worth looking at. And then for the housing performance strategy, I love the idea of looking ahead. I'm intrigued by the ideas from the Portland Neighbors Welcome. I think that the square box that they put out there doesn't feel quite real to me. I think that maybe at least the eastern edge of that should be tempered by where to look for the areas where there's more or less risk of displacement and try and draw back. So I think it is worth in the housing performance looking at an inner east side upzone to accommodate more households in walkable neighborhoods where there's low numbers of vulnerable folks likely to be displaced. So the housing development happens there rather than further east, which we just saw in the middle housing map where there is more displacement opportunity. But I think that the boundary should be looked at with the displacement lens. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, there is a section in the demographic section that talks about the trends with the household sizes, and that's where, if you recall, there was one slide where families with children slightly down, 1 and 2 person households 70% or something like that of Portland, but we can look to elevate that into the executive summary if it's not already in there.
Okay, that it may not be. I just wanted us to be able to point to that as we get to the next stage.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Chair O'Meara, for the record, I had a question and then a comment. Ariel, in the table that you presented, I saw the data around the approximate 10,000 units needed to be produced for houseless households. And I'm wondering if how is that being defined? Is that a 0 to 30% area median income? Or is that really looking at point in time counts, and annualizing that? And it's okay if you don't have the answer right now, but I'm trying to differentiate between the 10,000 units needed to house folks that are experiencing homelessness, and then the 53% of housing production needed overall that need to be affordable units, right? And sort of where is the data differentiation between those two, if you know, and if not, totally fine to follow up.
I do know, so I can answer. So we used the same methodology that ONA used for the 10,000 number for Metro's units to address houselessness. So that's the same that we applied at the jurisdictional level. So it's taking the most recent point in time count. I believe they used 2019 because that's when they first did this analysis. So their numbers from that 2019 point in time count. And that's households, and then it rolls in McKinney-Vento data for estimated households with children that are living in shelters, that are living on the streets, or are living in hotels, or doubled up. So it adds in extra data, and then also applies a 1.6 multiplier to account for the underestimated. What we know is an underestimated count for our households, and then was there a second part to your question? I apologize. Oh, the 53%. Yes. So when we account for the households, houseless households, ONA does distribute those by income bins. And I don't remember the exact breakdown, but it's essentially something like 80% or 90% is in that 0 to 30, and then maybe 5% in the 30 to 60, and then a very small, slim portion of households that are earning around less than 80%, but still more than 60%. So it's rolled into that 53% when we've presented it to you. So it's accounting for that 47% of what we estimate of accounted for households, but then that additional percentage of units for houseless households.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that being there and available on the tip of your fingers. So just to follow up on Vice Chair Thompson's comments regarding the executive summary, because the housing production strategy will really be the development of the tools and the techniques, right, to build enough housing and meet our housing needs in the city of Portland, having a mention of the needed focus of affordable housing production. And, if we can call out that is 53% of the needed units to be produced, and really guiding in the housing production strategy that will be a key focus area in terms of tools and approaches to affordable housing production. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Michael Pouncil. Commissioner Pouncil. don't know much about these things, but I have this question that has been. I'm just gonna throw it out there. So, permits. Is there like a tracking of like permits for, let's say, those those more expensive dwellings? You had said that there was that there was the upper income housing growth had exceeded, what what the city was expecting to happen, and I was just wondering if there was any type of like tracking for that, so that and I don't know if there's anything that the city can do, like saying, hey, okay, we have X amount of upper income housing in this area where we probably need more middle income housing in that area. And I was just wondering if permits had a way of determining that at all, and if the city had any way of like maybe saying yes or no, or I'm not quite sure, but that's just what I was thinking, on that, just so that, because it's looking as though that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. You had said that there was a vulnerability. 42% of the growth were in economically vulnerable areas. So, I'm just wondering if there's any way to try to work with those percentages to maybe get more affordable housing that's closer in, since we do know that closer in, it's more higher income that's being produced. Yeah, so I'm just wondering about some equity in that, and somehow.
Yeah, and maybe start with sort of your original point. I think we assume new construction is expensive, so most of the new construction is going to be only affordable to the higher income brackets to begin with. The permit data allows us to track location and housing type, but we have to look to other data sources. We get the realtor listings for single family home sales. We have a separate data source that we subscribe to that allows us to get rents and rent levels across the city. So we sort of have to triangulate those two to be able to figure out, what is the range of sort of rents available in a given neighborhood.
Can I? Perhaps I could just jump in to say a couple things about this. So Patricia Diefenhofer for the record. Vice Chair Pouncil, I think you were speaking to this slide that shows that I want to make sure that we're clearly differentiating, households versus housing units, right? So what this slide is showing is that we have higher income, we have a greater proportion of higher income households than we anticipated in our planning. And that's just by virtue of, and maybe Tom and others can explain more, but our demographics is such, if we've had in-migration, whatever it is, we've had in-migration of people who are higher income. So that's to differentiate it from the housing unit, where that's one of our challenges, right? Is that we don't have a whole lot of control on the income levels that the housing units are targeting. So housing is built, market rate housing can be available to any household, right? And then we've been increasingly through inclusionary housing and other approaches trying to increase the production of the affordable housing, the units that would be available to and affordable to lower income households, or households that are from that 0 to 80% of MFI. So again, we're talking about two different things, and so we just want to make sure to keep those things clear. And I think just one more point that I wanted to make. You referenced a statistic about 42%. I think what you were referring to, and Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but when you were explaining where our capacity is, I think you were saying that the capacity that we have in the zoning currently that we've estimated through the BLI, 42% of the capacity is in areas that are considered to be vulnerable. So that also speaks to, I think, a point that Vice Chair Thompson is making about thinking about, where you have greater vulnerability, and if you have a lot of potential growth in those areas, you're looking at considerations about displacement. But I think the number 42%, while it's not a low number, it is, I think we do have growth capacity in other areas that are not the vulnerable areas. So I just wanted to point that out. And Tom, you might have something to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and again, it's also, that's the capacity, that's the zone capacity, that's the opportunity. We haven't seen as much development occur in those vulnerable areas, as we have in as you were saying, the closer in neighborhoods that have more amenities and are better connected. And then to your other point about, yes, we want to encourage more affordable housing in those high opportunity areas, and that's one of the advantages of the inclusionary housing program that you'll hear a little bit about tonight. It's also part of, it is a factor in how the Housing Bureau makes decisions on which housing projects to fund. And so that begins to sort of drive that, towards those higher opportunity areas that normally would just see regular market development be that higher income category. So a lot of that is, we do that through regulations with the inclusionary housing to the limit that it's allowed by state law. But then we have other sort of discretionary policy choices that the city can take to also do that as well, and in terms of encouraging that more moderate or more affordable housing in those neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Routh, go ahead.
Thank you. I echo, thank you also, Tom and staff, for this presentation. Also, I was happy to join EPAP Housing Subcommittee's presentation last night. So Sam and team, way to go. I echo Commissioner Spivak's interest in looking at zoning in a future, as we're looking at the housing production strategies. One thing, and I appreciate Commissioner Thompson's mentioning the executive summary. My thought is around older adults, that component, and just highlighting it. It notes downsizing, moving to group housing, or trying to stay in their existing housing. And I come from the age-friendly Oregon Summit today, and talked a lot about intergenerational housing, and we have seen some of those. I think that might be implied in the aging and community piece later in the paragraph, but would love to just highlight that intergenerational housing is also in our future, and that while we mention uppers in aging in population, that we're slightly lower than the rest of the state, particularly because of the coast. We are actually a more aged population already across the nation. So that might be worthy of note. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments or questions from commissioners on housing needs analysis? We will continue this at the October 24th meeting, so our next Planning Commission meeting, when we expect to make our recommendation. So I assume it's okay if other questions come up before then. Yeah, as per usual, send those to staff. But go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you, Chair O'Mara. For the record, Patricia Diefendorfer. So we have noted the comments, understanding that there's an interest in highlighting some additional pieces of information in the executive summary that was outlined here, in addition to using the transmittal letter that we will craft along with you in greater detail next week to highlight certain issues. So that's fine. We do have staff from the Housing Bureau here to provide, and I know we are running a little bit late, but they are here to provide a little bit of an informational briefing on the inclusionary housing calibration study in particular, but the inclusionary housing policy. And so just wanted to take the temperature of the commission and see if that's something that you still wanted to get some information about. They are here tonight, and I think they could do that presentation in a relatively quick period of time. So I will leave that to your discretion.
Thank you for that reminder, Patricia. That was mentioned at the start of the meeting. I think if we can have a 5 to 10, no longer than 10, presentation with question and comment. I know that we do want to proceed to the next item, and we have many people here excited to share their testimony. So, but with that, I want to acknowledge that we have a staff member present. So, I do not know their name, but please welcome PHB staff members.
Apologies, commissioners. We'll have the staff introduce themselves.
So do you have a present? Yeah. Okay. Do you want this instead? No.
You want to get more one? Sure. I'll go ahead and kick us off then. Hello, I do. I'll try to project. Good evening. My name is Dory Hellier, and I am the Development Incentives Manager with the Portland Housing Bureau. And with me,
good evening. My name is Jessie Connor. I'm the Senior Policy and Planning Coordinator at the Housing Bureau and the Project Manager for the IH Calibration Study.
So we'll try to breeze through things here fairly quickly to just give you an update on the IH calibration study that's been undertaken over the last year and kind of our next steps. We'll have a presentation shortly. In the meantime, I can kind of let you know just about our inclusionary housing policy framework as to when the program went into effect in February of 2017, and then going into this calibration study where we are coming from. So the policy itself is citywide, and we're calibrating rates and incentives by the geography. Based on the state guidelines around any inclusionary housing, the mandatory amount is 80% of median family income. We are encouraging the program participation at 60% of median family income based on the incentives available.
And this is a requirement, again, based on state guidelines that for buildings with 20 or more new units being added. And it was a city council goal and in our implementation to maintain the comparable quality, size, bedroom composition, and distribution within the building so that the market rate and affordable units are comparable. And the affordability period is for 99 years. So that's where we started. And then with the program itself, real quickly, we have 4 different options for a developer to participate in the program. The mandatory option is that first one, as I described, the 20% of units restricted at 80% of median family income. We have that incentive to meet that at 60% by only having 10% of the units restricted. There's another option to build units off-site, but with a little bit higher inclusion rates or in more restrictive income criteria. And then we also have an option for units to be transferred into an existing building. And the final option is for building to owner to pay a fee in lieu instead of providing the affordability. We have mostly seen units on site and at about 50-50 split between the 60 and 80% median family income options. So there's a number of incentives that we give or through the city. So density and height bonuses that are provided through zoning code, as well as a property tax exemption for 10 years. And this is for any of the buildings that are providing the units on site. And so within the central city, based on the initial calibration study, any of the whole building would be receiving the tax exemption. So it's a lot higher value than outside of the central city, where only the affordable units in a building would receive the tax exemption. There's also an exemption available from the affordable housing construction excise tax, and as well as one for exemption of the system development charges, but that's also then for that 60% median family income limit only. We started with the program also highlighting reduced parking requirements, but that's somewhat become a moot point with other changes that you are aware of. So we have noticed that, with this, of all the different requirements upon construction, whether, development requirements across the city, that inclusionary housing is the one that's able to offset financially significantly some of the cost. So going into the calibration study itself, we came in with some overarching questions. So how does inclusionary housing now fit into the broader picture of development feasibility compared to when the program first went into place? Are the incentives that we have adequate to at least somewhat offset the requirements? And are our policy objectives being met, the ones that we talked about as far as housing throughout the city within mixed income buildings at 60% of area median income? And what can we do to simplify the standards, the flexibility, to make the program easier to use for developers as well as for us to administer?
Thank you. Great. So I'm going to breeze us through and hit some of the highlights of the calibration study. So what you see on the screen is really the scope and the components of what we looked at, what we analyzed, and what we brought forward, and the discussions we had with the external stakeholder work group. So we did everything from looking at, surveying the experience of residents in, up, and operating IH units. We did an assessment. Actually, we did that in coordination with Planning and Sustainability, so thank you, staff, for that. Analyzing the sort of question around underproduction, right? Are folks are they building 19 unit buildings so that they're not obligated to provide an inclusionary housing unit? We did a program comparative analysis, right? So looking at inclusionary housing, programs across the country and other jurisdictions. We did to build in some more context around the development landscape. We looked at a development cost study. So looking at construction costs in Portland and then comparing some of those to peer cities. Of course, we did the development prototype analysis. So that's looking at, a variety, 15 to be exact, development prototypes of various construction types in high, moderate, and low cost areas. So to build in that context, we had a consultant, BAE, Urban Economics, do some analysis for us. They did the cost analysis and then the development prototype analysis piece. So construction costs have risen more than 50% since 2016. Over the course of that same time, Portland's median income has increased by 29%, and those high-end rental rates increased by 24%. And I'll caveat this because I recognize that you just heard data from planning staff and our dates, and their dates are pulled, different data dates. We did 2016 through 2023, so that's why some of those numbers are going to look a little different. So just to lay that to rest. We can go to the next one. So that second piece of the construction cost analysis was to look at, okay, well, what could we kind of say if we're looking at, say, a 6-story, apartment building in Portland, what's going to be sort of that typical average cost? And then what does that look like compared to some peer cities? So about $422,000 a unit to produce in that 6-story building here in Portland. Seattle, it's a little bit more expensive. They do have higher land and hard costs. However, they don't have any SDCs. Projects up there, they're simply required to build whatever the SDCs would have been gone to pay for. So if there needed to be a sidewalk improvement, if there needed to be lighting, if there needed to be, some green space, etc., they would actually have to build that in their area. Sacramento, a little bit more expensive. SDCs are a lot higher, while other costs are similar or a little bit lower. Denver, it's about the same. Just wanted to go over quickly some of the points that BAE used in putting together the development prototype analysis when we were looking at those 15 different models. Of course, they reviewed our previous work that we had done in 2016 when we were putting the policy into place. We wanted to make sure that we had prototypes that reflected not only different market conditions, but also like small apartment buildings to large towers. They did their own then external market analysis. They did some pretty intensive developer and stakeholder interviews, property managers, architects, the whole gamut. They interviewed many, I don't think all, but many of our work group members. And really, we were looking at, these two big points, at the end to assess to what extent the development prototypes would be feasible under our current market conditions, with or without IH. So we had those two levers where we could sort of turn it on and off, and to compare the value of the city's offset incentive package with the cost of the IH requirement. So kind of what's the cost of IH compared to what's the city offering as far as those that, the density and the SDCs and the construction excise tax and the tax exemption. Broad brushstrokes here. In the central city, our high level findings were in the central city, to Dory's point, we are adequately balancing the offset. So the cost of providing those IH units is typically balanced. Outside the central city, though, we saw two different scenarios happening. In a high-cost market, say Slabtown, right, technically just outside the boundary of central city, the offsets are less than. So that means the cost of providing the IH units, we're not providing enough incentives there in that package. That's by and large due to that partial property tax exemption that Dory discussed earlier. So the way the current program works, inside the central city, you get a tax exemption on all the units in the building. Outside the central city currently, you get a tax exemption only on the affordable units, only on the affordable portion of the building. However, those two markets, right, they don't really care about whether we're inside or outside of central city. You're likely that the comps for those two types of products, maybe in the Pearl and then, maybe in Slabtown, could be relatively similar. The other piece that really stood out was that also outside the central city, in lower cost markets. So some of our East Portland communities and neighborhoods, the offsets are more than. That's largely due to the market rate rents being closer to what the affordable rent is. So the mandatory program, right? 20% of the units at 80% MFI, it's close to market rate, what you would charge. So the impact of IH is a little bit negligible in today's market. My last slide before I kick it back over to Dory is just kind of summarize our work group's recommendations. They really went with the guiding principles of, simplify, add flexibility, create some clarity. Three major buckets. First is really around that clarity and flexibility piece, program administrative, and design. So making some adjustments to the reasonable equivalency requirement, streamlining the offsite location, clarifying some pretty confusing language around the reconfigure option. The biggest piece that we had a lot of discussion around was around the tax exemption. And the recommendation was for staff to do a little bit more digging into the foregone revenue and what it would look like to increase our cap for providing tax exemptions for inclusionary housing projects outside of the central city when the projects are providing 60% MFI units. So that again, we're continuing to target where we know the greatest need is. They also identified some areas of, additional and continuing analysis around multifamily homeownership and looking into the policy threshold, so the 20-unit threshold. Dory.
So last couple points here then. There are key takeaways and how we're moving forward from this process is that the IH policy was working overall across the city as far as we were able to create to date 1,200 units of restricted income units. Many of those are family-sized units in mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods. But even with the balanced IH program in many of those neighborhoods, development itself is not feasible, and it's due to many other market conditions. And so there's such as the increasing construction costs that we've seen and many other factors that you've already heard about in other presentations here. So what we're looking at with the, as Jesse mentioned, we're fully offsetting within the central city, need to make some adjustments outside of the central city. And we are looking at changes we can make the program easier to flow through. So the last slide then is what our next steps are. So we are further engaging BAE consultants to look at the cost to expand the property tax exemption outside the central city. What is that impact going to be? What's that foregone revenue? And then we need to talk about that with city council, with the county commission, and figure out what our priorities there are and where it's best to delineate that expansion. And we are also already working on proposed code and administrative rule changes based on the work group recommendations. Those will, there's a couple to Title 33 that you may see here at the Planning Commission, but we're not sure exactly how far that's all going to go yet. What we were looking at there is primarily some fine tuning on the reconfiguration option, which is the ability to include the same number of bedrooms as it would be in larger units, when family size units, as would be the minimum requirement. So if someone was doing the 20% 80 option and they had to provide 8 one-bedroom units, but they have a couple of 4-bedroom units in the building, they could do the 2 4-bedroom units and meet the criteria. It gets a little more intricate than that, but at the baseline, that's what it is. So we are looking at allowing that option in the off-site option, for instance. So some very technical fine-tunings within zoning code, but not major. And then we are going to do this implementation over the next, along with other movements to refine and increase feasibility, along with other changes across the city, so that those would go into effect in March of 24. Before then, we will be going to City Council before the end of the year to look at 2 other things that we were able to do to ease development using the property tax exemption, our multi, and that is to no longer have to go to City Council for the final approval of those applications, allowing us to sign off on our inclusionary housing permit status earlier. And we also were able to change the requirement or the applicability of the tax exemption at the state level this year, so that with office conversions, the full structural value would receive the tax exemption, which wasn't available before. And that's it for right now.
Thank you so much for being here and providing that update, and for all the great work and looking into the effectiveness of IH. Also want to acknowledge that Vice Chair Thompson participated in the process, so appreciate her engagement. Since we are running over time, I'm going to ask if commissioners have follow-up questions to go ahead and send those to Patricia, BPS staff, and those can be routed to PHB staff for response. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Wonderful. So we are going to proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is the Southeast Rising Plan. This is a public hearing tonight. I'm going to call up Bill Cunningham and Shane Vale, and please correct me if I mispronounce your name when you get up here. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. As they're making their way up, I'm going to ask commissioners to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, and I'll start us off. I am disclosing that I am a resident of Brentwood, Darlington. I own a home there with my family. My property is not being considered for a zoning change, but do need to disclose that I am a resident of the plan area. Okay, any other conflicts or disclosures from commissioners? All right, with that, welcome our staff presenters to kick us off.
Let's see, make sure I have this turned on. Sounds like it is. I'm Bill Cunningham with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm a co-project manager for the Lower Southeast Rising Area Plan, along with Shane Valley from the Bureau of Transportation. And if you can give me a moment to make sure I've got our presentation set up to go. Share it via Zoom yourself.
And while you're doing that, Bill, I'll just give a brief overview of the sequence here, as I know we have a lot of people waiting to testify. So we will have a brief staff overview and presentation, and then we'll go ahead and proceed to the testifiers. We'll start with those giving testimony here tonight in person, and then we'll proceed with those joining online.
Apologies, commissioners, and to our audience. I think we're having a little more trouble screen sharing today than we usually do, so apologies for that.
Okay, and now make you a co-host. Should be able to do it now, Bill.
Turn off this microphone.
It's muted.
All right. Wait, let me figure out this audio. Sorry about the audio issues.
It's not connected.
Maybe just shift where you've got the microphone. Try speaking again. Microphone like the Chair Mara was suggesting. Maybe you could just.
How do you get this?
It seems like it's too close.
It's not actually responding to full screen.
Yeah, why don't we? It's coming out of. There's no volume. I don't know. We're gonna have to.
So I think maybe we'll be on you and you can share screen.
Yeah, why don't we do that? I'll just share the screen. Close your computer.
Log out of the meeting.
All right, JP, you'll be driving and we'll be telling you when to forward.
All right.
Apologies to everyone, especially members of the community who've been patiently waiting to provide testimony. Again, apologies for the technical issues. As I mentioned before, I'm Bill Cunningham with the Bureau of Planning Sustainability. I was a co-project manager leading the planning side of this effort, which was very much a joint effort with the Bureau of Transportation. And Shane Valley here is here representing transportation. Next, please. Just wanted to highlight the key asks we have for you in terms of your tasks. Staff is proposing that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to City Council that includes adopting this report, and the actual amendments would be amendments to the Comprehensive Plan Urban Design Framework, the Comprehensive Plan map, the zoning map, and a couple of the zoning code maps. There are also transportation components to this effort, although I should mention that the transportation projects will be updated as part of an overall batching of projects that'll become part of the transportation system plan update that'll take place in 2024, 2025. Next, please. What we'll be doing tonight is providing you a briefing on both the land use proposals and transportation proposals. We'll also have a couple of our community advisory committee people share their perspective on the plan, and then we'll be opening things up to general public testimony. Next. The focus of the plan, especially for those who are not very familiar with this area, is what the plan is referring to as Lower Southeast Portland, and it extends from Cesar Chavez Boulevard over east towards Southeast 92nd and I-205, and then the northern extensions are around Holgate and Foster, and then down to the southern boundary of the city. And this includes the Brentwood-Darlington neighborhood, which is the core focus area for the plan, as well as nearby areas that include the Woodstock, Mount Scott-Erlita, and Lentz neighborhoods. Next, please. We're at the culmination of a 2-year planning process. We kicked the project off in the spring of 2021. And I should acknowledge a couple people who are key in moving things forward. Marty Stockton started out as the leader of our planning work, as well as Brian Poole from PBOT, who was leading work through much of the project. Next, please. Why are we focusing on this area? I wanted to highlight a key component that went into the selection of a focus in this area. Portland has objectives for creating a city where most people live in complete neighborhoods where you have options to be able to meet many of your needs locally. So having things like neighborhood business districts to be able to walk or bike or take transit to. And what we found in this area is, and this was done as part of our comprehensive plan update analysis, as well as a preceding work from the Portland plan. This heat map is showing areas in terms of the bright yellow and hatched areas that have relatively good access to services in terms of where commercial services are, where community services are, where we have sidewalks, bike and transit facilities to get there. And you can see the Woodstock neighborhood area glowing pretty brightly, and that's around the neighborhood Main Street on Woodstock. You also see it showing up in Woodstock. I'm sorry, and Foster. Now, what you also see here is the purple to blue areas are areas that lack both the community services as well as transportation access to get there. And the Brentwood-Darlington area, you can see it around Flaville, is one of the larger areas in our inner east to mid-east neighborhoods that really lacks both the commercial services as well as the complete transportation infrastructure to get there. And a key thing to highlight is Brentwood-Darlington did not become part of the city of Portland until 1986. And prior to that, Multnomah County did not require sidewalks and many other urban amenities. And you can see the image there in the upper right highlighting some of the incomplete infrastructure we have in this area. Next, please. Another background piece to this zoning project is the existing zoning, which you can see in the yellow and orange colors here, is very predominantly single dwelling, mostly R5 and R2.5 zoning. That amounts to 74% of the zoning in the area. There's another 10% that has multi-dwelling zoning, mostly the lower scale RM1 zoning, that's about 10%. And another 6% has commercial mixed-use zoning, and that's in the red and sometimes pink tones. And the majority of that commercial zoning is in areas like the Woodstock, Main Street, and Foster, and Lentz. Much of Brentwood-Darlington, as you can see here, has very little opportunity for neighborhood businesses. There's also industrial and employment zoning near the Springwater Corridor and 82nd. Next, please. Another guiding aspect to some of our planning efforts is the identification of centers to serve as hubs for services for surrounding neighborhoods. And the designated centers in this area include the Woodstock Neighborhood Center, Heart of Foster, and the Lentz Town Center. And that circle is showing a half-mile distance from the core of those centers, and that approximates a walkable distance. And you can see that most of Brentwood-Darlington is well beyond that half-mile walkable distance. Next, please. Our project objectives came out of early input from the community and discussions from our public advisory committee, and really response to some of the issues that were identified. And the objectives include increasing opportunities for neighborhood businesses and increasing housing choices and affordability. I should mention that when we are doing a survey work with the community, increasing neighborhood businesses was identified as the top priority for the area in terms of land uses. Second was housing affordability. And then another project objective was expanding active and green transportation access in the area so it's safer and easier to get around. Another objective was to support community stability. And next, please. And correspondingly, the main plan components were land use map changes to provide more opportunities for neighborhood businesses and housing, as well as recommendations for transportation projects so that people can get around safely, especially by walking, biking, and taking transit, but also considering other access modes. And community stabilization was, again, a key plan component. And the interest in the community was creating a situation where everyone could benefit from future improvements. Next, please. And very briefly about the process, because it's a very lengthy, very involved process. Our initial phase was looking at what the issues are in the area. We established a project advisory committee, and you'll be hearing from some committee members who met for the 2 years of the plan and were instrumental in helping to shape the plan, guide us in terms of community outreach, and were a sounding board for many of the ideas. A mailing was initially sent to all addresses in the area so that everyone is aware of the project. We got 1,500 initial survey responses, did a lot of door-to-door canvassing that was focused on the affordable apartment complexes and mobile home parks in the area to make sure we're really hearing from a broad range of people. And I'm not going to get into detail about this Pin It Portland mapping, but it was an online way for people to share their thoughts on issues and the locations. Next, please. After we had heard about what the issues were, we went to a second phase that was looking at potential solutions and alternatives. We asked people as to what they saw as their priorities amongst potential solutions and what approaches they preferred. We had an online open house and survey. It was translated into 5 languages. We got more than 500 responses, had a range of neighborhood walks and bike rides. Just one other thing to mention here, we had some focus groups that we had partnered with Latino Network on to make sure we're really hearing from a broader range of people in terms of issues and solutions. Next, please. When we presented alternatives to the community, wanted to highlight the range of land use alternatives we shared. We didn't want to presume that there's one solution that was going to work. We asked people for their thoughts on a range of potential approaches that range from basically little or no change, keeping things as they are. And a second, number 2, alternative was looking at just doing some minor changes around the existing commercial nodes at some of the major intersections like Faville and 52nd and the Arleta Triangle at 72nd and Woodstock. And then the third was looking a bit more broadly at corridors, especially focusing on 52nd and 72nd, which are the 2 major north-south corridors in the heart of the community. And that was looking at proposing the idea of expanding both housing options and small business options on those corridors. And the fourth option was basically doing all the other scenario or alternative approaches, but added the idea of establishing a new mixed-use center for the area, which you can see circled in the area around 72nd and Faville. And that fourth option received the most support from those who responded. So more than half of people of the 500 indicated that was what they saw as their preferred scenario, especially in terms of expanding opportunities for neighborhood businesses and housing. Next, please. Phase 3 kicked off with the publishing of our discussion draft, which happened in May of 2023. We also did an online open house and survey to ask people's perspectives on those proposals. I had a map app. We had 6 tabling events at community events and gathering places like farmers markets and grocery outlet. Spoke to over 150 people at those events. Sent 6,000 mailers to property owners for the properties being considered for zone changes, as well as to nearby residents. That helped us shape the further refinement of the plan that brought us to the proposed draft, which is before you now. Next, please. I'm going to go briefly, at least highlighting some of the tip of the iceberg components of the land use proposals. Next, please. Briefly, for those of you who aren't so familiar with our zoning code, the main zones that we're proposing for expansion in the area include the RM1 multi-dwelling zone. That's a small-scale zone 2 to 3 stories that's intended to be compatible with single family areas. It allows the same scale development that most of the single dwelling zoning we're proposing for changes already allow. So no more than 2 or 3 stories and a similar amount of building coverage, but it provides more flexibility for numbers of units. We're also looking at applying the RM2 zone, which is a 3 to 4 story mid-scale multi-dwelling zone in center locations and along some of the corridors. In terms of the commercial mixed-use zones, there are a few proposals for small corner retail to go to the CR zone to support their continuation. And then the more substantial changes are to expand the CM1 zone, which is a small scale 2 to 3 story mixed use zone. And then the CM2 zone, more of a mid-scale 3 to 4 story scale and zone. And that's what we typically apply in our centers and Main Street corridors. Next, please. The overall approach is shown here, and I should highlight that what I'm sharing with you right now is not, of course, parcel specific. It's fairly generalized in terms of the zone changes for the sake of the presentation. The proposed zone changes are shown in the coloration here, the blue showing the multi-dwelling zoning, and the red tone showing the proposed commercial mixed-use zoning. And the zone changes apply to just about 6.5% of the plan area. It's pretty strategic. The zone changes are focused on the corridors, as you can see, in 52nd and 72nd, and in and around the proposed new Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Center, circled in orange there. There's also some proposed changes to the zoning near the current Lentz Town Center and up towards Foster. I should also just highlight that in the feedback we received over time, there was very diverse perspectives on what we should do with zoning. There was some advocates saying, we're only doing this once every few decades. We should go broader with our multi-dwelling zoning. Others were really concerned about the change, but the majority in our survey work was really felt that we're striking a right balance with what was included in the plan. Next, please. Zooming into the proposed neighborhood center, I wanted to highlight what was being considered there. The bright yellow line is showing 72nd Avenue, and this is right by Southeast Faville. There's a grocery outlet that is currently an anchor right at that intersection. And this is proposing expanding the commercial zoning to cultivate over time a neighborhood Main Street business district there that really provide a neighborhood business anchor that does not currently exist. The zoning at the 100% corner, CM2, would be applied around that Faville and 72nd area, and there'd be smaller CM1 zoning going further south. Another thing proposed here is some rezones from employment zoning at 82nd and Faville, about a little bit over 5 acres, would be going to CM2 zoning. The employment zoning there allows employment and light industrial uses, but also allows drive-through and gas stations and self-service storage uses. And the community really wanted there to be a hub in that area, especially given the proximity to existing manufactured home parks and low-cost apartments that don't have a lot of services nearby. Another part of the proposal was to expand multi-dwelling zoning in this area. And that medium-scale zoning, you can see in the darker blue, is pretty strategically located very close to the commercial services. And then the lighter blue is that small-scale 2 to 3 story scale that is applied elsewhere in the area, a little bit further from the commercial services. And I want to again highlight that's a similar scale to what's already allowed in those areas, but allows more flexibility for numbers of units. North of Faville, it already has RM1, small scale multi-dwelling zoning. And part of the concept here too is allowing people both to be close to services, but allowing more residents in this area could also provide some of the customer base that could help with the viability of businesses. And next, please. Wanted to highlight some of the zone changes related to applying or expanding commercial mixed-use zoning. The general approach is to apply that medium-scale CM2 zone to the larger hubs, including the center. You can see the dark tones here, both in the center and the hubs such as 52nd and Faville. And then the smaller scale CM1 zone would be applied to some of the smaller commercial hubs. Next, please. The largest amount of zoning is to multi-dwelling zoning. What you see here is the light blue zoning on 72nd, to some extent 52nd, are the primary places where we're proposing rezones from single dwelling zoning, mostly from R2.5. And then what's being proposed in some other locations is the RM2 medium scale zone. You can see that darker blue around the new proposed neighborhood center, but also close to 82nd and Foster and along the eastern portions of Woodstock. One thing that's not shown here is Woodstock between 52nd and 72nd already has RM1 multi-dwelling zoning. And one thing you cannot see as well here is that that band parallel to 82nd that's proposed for an upzone to RM2 would be an extension of existing RM2 zoning that applies further south, but this would apply some of that expanded housing options closer to the town center. Let's see, one other item I wanted to highlight related to the multi-dwelling zones is the corridor zoning, 72nd and 52nd, along with the multi-dwelling zoning, would come some options for doing small-scale ground floor commercial uses. There are existing zoning code regulations where in existing designated corridors in multi-dwelling zones, you could do some ground floor commercial. Next, please. Another aspect I wanted to highlight is a goal of the project was to avoid increasing development or redevelopment risk of existing low-cost housing. And what this map is showing is two things. The stars are showing unregulated low-cost apartments. Those are relatively inexpensive apartments that don't have the protections of affordable housing mandates. And then the orange blocks are showing where we have our manufactured dwelling parks. And you can see here that where the stars are located are not in the same places as where we're proposing the zone changes. So it's pretty intentional to avoid the zone changes to those low-cost apartments and mobile home parks to not increase the risk of redevelopment of those important affordable housing resources. And another thing we wanted to highlight here too is that proposed center would be serving a significant cluster of mobile home parks, and the community sees those as an affordable housing resource they'd like to see continued into the future. Next, please. Another component of the zone changes includes some rezones near Johnson Creek to properties that are owned by the Bureau of Environmental Services. These properties have been acquired by BES for the purposes of floodplain and habitat restoration. Most of these properties are largely within the 100-year floodplain. The largest property is just about 3.5 acres. You can see it in the image aerial to the left. It is not a going concern in terms of actual industrial or employment uses. It's pretty forested and floods periodically. Next, please. In terms of community stabilization, I also wanted to highlight that we had undertaken a displacement risk analysis looking at the economics of the area. And the analysis was indicating that there's really very little additional risk to displacement that would result from the zone changes, and there are a number of reasons for this. One issue being is that the area has relatively high rates of home ownership. There's a fairly small increment of change when it comes to the locations where we're proposing rezones from single dwelling to a multi-dwelling, and we're not really expecting any increase to displacement risk, partially because the townhouses that are already allowed in the single dwelling zones are eminently feasible for development. Another thing to consider, this area has a fair number of fairly underutilized properties, often somewhat larger properties with a very small number of units or no units in some cases that are expected to be the primary near-term development opportunity. Also, the CM2 zone, which is the zone that's most likely to result in larger scale development, is typically in properties with little or no existing housing. Next, please. The community stabilization part of the plan just highlights a number of approaches to that, to achieving that strategy. One is what I'd already shared about preserving existing low-cost housing by where we apply the zone changes. Another was expanding opportunities for the application of inclusionary housing by applying additional commercial and multi-dwelling zones where inclusionary housing applies. Also, the act, or one of the intents of expanding multi-dwelling zoning, was to allow a greater diversity of housing types that are affordable to a broader range of households. Another approach was, there are actually a lot of home-based businesses in this area, and 72nd is one of the places with many of those businesses. And allowing for expansion of those small businesses and to be more public-facing along those corridors was seen in some of our discussions as a way of allowing people to grow their businesses in place. Next, please. The plan also includes some recommendations for future action that would happen beyond the lifetime of this plan. And one includes coordination with our existing 82nd Avenue planning efforts on community stabilization. The proposed neighborhood center is very much part of that broader 82nd Avenue corridor. There are also various strategies related to calling for additional investments in affordable housing in the area. There's a lot of community interest in having more focused community economic development and workforce development efforts in the area. There are recommendations for at least considering the idea of a neighborhood prosperity initiative to be applied to this area, and perhaps a tax increment finance district. One resource in the area is there's an existing Brentwood-Darlington Community Center near Lane Middle School. It's primarily used for early childhood education, but there's interest in growing that to be more of a resource hub for the community and a resilience hub. Next, please. The key amendments that would actually make these mapping things happen, I just wanted to very briefly mention them, are amendments to the Comprehensive Plan Urban Design Framework diagrams. This includes adding a new circle for this proposed neighborhood Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Center, and designation of portions of 52nd and 72nd as neighborhood corridors, reflecting the mix of commercial and multi-dwelling zoning there and their key transportation functions. And something you'll be hearing from Shane about is we're very much coordinated in terms of the land use approaches as well as the transportation approaches to make sure that these corridors we're cultivating are accompanied by improvements to make sure that they're safe places to walk along and cross and access. Next, please. Some of the other actual amendments to implement what I was sharing with you are changes to the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map. I'm not going to get into detail about them here, but they are the actual regulatory mechanisms to make those changes happen. And there are a couple zoning code maps that identify designated civic and neighborhood corridors that would also be amended in conformance with what I shared previously. And I'm going to pass things on to Shane.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening. My name is Shane Valley. I am a senior planner at the Bureau of Transportation, co-managing this project, the transportation elements. Next slide. So before I dive into the recommendations, I just want to talk a little bit about what those recommendations are being responsive to, what we heard from community during our 2-year process, what our own sort of transportation system analysis revealed. And the things we heard and found fall into 3 buckets. The first bucket were concerns about traffic safety and traffic calming and just kind of unsafe travel behavior on our transportation network. And this is on top of a network that by standards of normal Portland neighborhoods is pretty incomplete. And to be explicit, I'm talking about lots of streets without pavement, lots of streets without sidewalks, infrequent pedestrian crossings. The second sort of bucket of things that we heard about was access to businesses, services, and community destinations, especially by folks looking to walk, to roll, to bike, to take transit. And this is really where the partnership between the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and PBOT pays off, because the answer to this concern really is a 2-part equation. One part is creating the opportunities for businesses and services and nodes of those to emerge. And then once you have those, making sure that the transportation network is such that it feels safe and reasonable and convenient to walk or bike or take transit to. And that third bucket of things we heard about was about the transit network. If you were to look at a map of the transit network when we started this project, you would see that TriMet's frequent lines basically trace the boundaries of this area and don't really go into the core area. And so transit services really lacking in frequency, but also a lot of the transit network in this part of town is oriented towards getting folks to and from downtown, but not really getting them around the neighborhood and to the destinations on the edges of the neighborhood. Next slide. So now to talk about what recommendations we're making on the transportation side of the ledger. The biggest, the core of the recommendations are these projects, and these would be capital projects delivered by the Bureau of Transportation, and they come in two flavors. The first are corridor improvements, and these are projects that address conditions on the busy streets in the district, and they're inclusive of things like safer crossings, improved bikeways, streetscape improvements, signal improvements at major intersections where we can swing that. The second flavor are neighborhood greenways, and these are low-stress neighborhood streets that are designed to be calm, low stress places to walk and bike. It's places where we've made interventions so that folks driving on the street, folks walking on the street, rolling, biking are all going a similar speed. Next slide. And this is a diagram that kind of conceptually shows how these two project types kind of work together. Like many other parts of Portland, Brentwood, Darlington, and the lower Southeast Rising Plan area kind of consists of a somewhat fine-grained network of local streets bounded on the edges by busy streets. And so we looked at each one of these neighborhood cells and looked at the neighborhood streets, or sorry, the busy streets around the cells, and said, what does the street need to do, what do we need to do to the street so that it is safer to walk along, to bike along? What do we need to do, especially in these places where we have these land use designations with a new corridor and a new center, to make it so that when these businesses and services emerge, that it's a place that feels safe and that it's very supportive of increased use and increased activity in those locations. And so those were our corridor improvement projects focused on sort of the bounds of the neighborhood streets. And then we wanted to make sure that folks in the more sort of less intense residential parts of the neighborhood had good access both to these busy streets, this is where our businesses and services are, but also we're able to get across them. Crossing these busy streets is a huge concern that we heard about throughout the plan. And so that's how these two project types work together. Next slide. And then this is basically that framework as applied to the plan area. And so you can see that pretty much every major street in the district, Holgate, Herald, Woodstock, Duke, Flavel, 52nd, 72nd, 92nd, have one of those orange lines, which represents a corridor improvement project. And then you can see how the green lines, which represent existing neighborhood greenways and proposed neighborhood greenways, sort of fill in the gaps and connect neighborhoods to those corridor improvements that are also located in those areas where we're proposing those land use designation changes. Next slide. So those are the transportation projects. And to get into one of the other big buckets of recommendations we were making, we worked with TriMet, we worked with community members and our consultant Jarrett Walker and Associates to look at how the transit network was and wasn't serving folks in this part of town. And there were like three things basically that we heard a lot of. I mentioned earlier that this map is showing TriMet's frequent transit network, and the thicker blue lines are the frequent transit lines, which are bus lines that come every 15 minutes or more frequently. And you can see how they kind of trace the outskirts of the core part of the plan area. And so one of the big things we heard was, hey, what about us? What about frequent service in this part of town? A couple of other things that we heard was a desire for continuous east-west service on Woodstock Boulevard to connect the Woodstock Main Street with the businesses and services in Lentz, in the Lentz Town Center. Looking for continuous north-south service on Southeast 72nd Avenue, connecting the core Brentwood-Darlington area with the new center at 72nd and Flavel, and connecting them to the Mount Scott Community Center and the businesses and services on Foster Road. And then also seeking continuous east-west service on Southeast Flavel, connecting the existing nodes of businesses and services at 52nd, 72nd with the max stop at 92nd and Flavel. Next slide, please. Luckily for us and luckily for the community members, TriMet was undergoing its own short-term service planning exercise at the same time as we were developing these recommendations. It was called Forward Together. And because we were working so closely with TriMet, we were able to just kind of submit these recommendations directly to that process, and TriMet was able to wholesale incorporate some of the recommendations we had come up with the community. So one of the things that's coming down the pike is continuous east-west service on Woodstock Boulevard, frequent service. They also brought more service to the Line 71, which provides important north-south service on Southeast 52nd. They adjusted some routing to the Line 10, so now we have north-south service on Southeast 72nd as well. Next slide. And then I would be very remiss if I didn't mention improving the quality of local streets and local infrastructures. That was a huge driving force behind why we got the grant money to do this planning work. And so this is a map that shows basically what are the priorities as far as improving the quality of those local streets. And this map does not show all of the needs in this area, but we know that the needs here are so significant that the city in any sort of near term can't really meet them. And so we wanted to be honest about that with folks, but also say, this is what's first. When we have the ability to flex and flow our paving resources, these are the streets that we're going to focus on. And they were selected based on streets that aligned with safe routes to school, or aligned with neighborhood greenways, or provided alternative access to main streets, or were in areas that we knew we couldn't make a lot of significant improvements to the quality of the pavement and sidewalks in neighborhood streets. And so we're looking at a district-wide or a neighborhood cell-wide sort of traffic calming approach, which is sort of right in the middle of that project area, that blue sort of hashed out area. That's an area where there's a lot of cut-through traffic. And so thinking about how we can employ district traffic calming to make it so that the infrastructure we have there works better now. And that wraps up my section on the transportation recommendations. And I just wanted to mention that at this time, staff aren't seeking a formal recommendation from Planning Commission on the elements in the transportation section of the plan. Those elements will be folded into, and those elements are inclusive of the projects I mentioned, but also there's some classification changes that basically just change the street classification so that they align with those recommended projects. Those two things are getting folded into the transportation system plan update that will start in 2024. Thank you. Next slide.
I'm going to be wrapping up the staff portion. I'm not going to read through everything here, but again, I wanted to emphasize the actual amendments that your recommendations would pertain to. And it's really focused on land use mapping, our urban design framework, which sets direction on the organization of the city, our comprehensive plan map, and our zoning map, and a couple of the zoning code maps. And going to move on to the next slide in terms of what's up next. Today, as you know, we have our briefing and public hearing. Next up on November 14th is scheduled a work session. Great opportunity to be able to dive into questions or issues that come from your review of the plan and what you hear from the public. And November 28th is the tentative date for a recommendation. Again, all of this is subject to change, but this is what we have in the calendar right now. I encourage all of you to take a look at the testimony we received on the MAP app to really get a broader sense for what we're hearing from the public. And I did want to invite a couple members as an extension of the staff presentation, a couple members from our project advisory committee to say a few words, and then we'd be opening things up to your questions on the staff presentation. We have Pam Hodge and Anna Weichsel, who are both part of our project advisory committee and really stuck with it for the full 2 years of the planning effort, and really played a key role as part of that advisory group in the plan.
Welcome, and please go ahead and state your name for the record.
Pam Hodge, Anna Weichsel. I guess I'm first up. So good evening. My name is Pam Hodge, and I am speaking to you tonight as both a longtime resident of Brentwood Darlington, which is the core study area, as you've heard, and as a member of the Project Advisory Committee. So my experience as a long-term resident has shaped my view of the plan. When I was growing up, Brentwood Darlington was known as Felony Flats. Even today, Brentwood Darlington is still relatively disadvantaged. We have lower household income, higher social vulnerability, less tree canopy, and more industrial pollution. As you've heard, Brentwood Darlington was not annexed to the city until 1986, so annexation gave us sewers but little else. Almost 40 years later, we are still waiting to become a complete neighborhood with other amenities common to most city neighborhoods. We are still waiting for sidewalks, paved streets, a designated commercial center, and adequate public transit. Because of these shortfalls, we are car dependent and travel outside our neighborhood to meet most needs. This is bad for the environment and bad for Brentwood Darlington residents. Significantly, the study shows that Brentwood Darlington residents have a life expectancy of 77.4 years, which is 1.5 years less than the citywide average. I believe the proposed land use and related transportation changes are needed to attract private investment and ultimately create a more livable neighborhood where residents can thrive. As a long-term Brentwood Darlington resident, I support the plan because it is a necessary next step towards realizing the promises made to area residents almost 40 years ago. I also support the adoption of the Lower Southeast Area Rising Plan because of the thoughtful process and multiple rounds of public engagement that led to its creation. Along with 21 other members of the Project Advisory Committee, I attended 12 PAC meetings over the past 2 years to review and provide advisory comments to staff as the project developed. In addition to the PAC meetings, staff conducted extensive outreach, as you have heard, to area residents through a variety of means. In response to community feedback, the plan strikes a careful balance between citywide need to accommodate growth while preserving and enhancing neighborhood livability for existing residents. Notably, the plan adds 7 acres of open space while upzoning only 6% of the total landmass to accommodate increased density. Again, speaking as both a long-term Brentwood Darlington resident and member of the PAC, I believe the plan strikes the right balance. Accordingly, I urge the Planning Commission to support the plan's recommendation for land use and transportation changes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Okay, my name is Anna Weichsel. Thank you for the opportunity to share my feedback as a member of the Lower Southeast Rising Project Advisory Committee with the Planning Commission. I brought my thoughts to the planning process as a resident in the planning area and chair of the Woodstock Neighborhood Association. Additionally, I was given the great opportunity to engage the project leaders, Marty Stockton, Brian Poole, Bill Cunningham, and Shane Valley, in design reviews and discussions with my architecture students at PSU. In 2 design studios titled Sponge City, we were working on out-of-the-box design concepts for the planning area that would combine architecture and environmental concerns of local rainwater mediation with urban strategies of equitable and economic growth, counteracting the usual patterns of gentrification. Based on these various engagements with the team, I want to highlight the exceptionality of the planning process as a holistic development with integrative efforts coordinating land use, transportation, inclusive of public transportation, economic and environmental planning strategies. Given our shared reality of the climate crisis, I'm particularly impressed with the balancing approach of the proposed draft plan, creating urban density for the neighborhood in conjunction with open land for cohabitation of humans and wildlife. The plan's recommendation for commercial node development along 52nd and 72nd, rather than the Portland typical commercial corridor zoning, is not only favored by the majority of the area's residents, but supports both the vision of the walkable neighborhood and a strategic opportunity for small-scale business developments. This could foster gradual local business growth for small-scale, for providing equitable prosperity for current residents. It would be beneficial to develop supportive programs that assist this vision. Existing identity-creating entities such as Portland Mercado and Black Future Farms and Learning Gardens could lead the programmatic focus here. The restorative efforts along Johnson Creek dedicated to continuous areas for wildlife and the designation of additional 7 acres of open land in the planning area speak of the environmental attentiveness in the proposed plan, addressing livability on multiple urban levels. Lastly, I also want to stress the effective public outreach process. In addition to the well-prepared materials for the PAC meetings, the extra efforts given to open house workshops, to public neighborhood walks and bike rides with the planning staff allowed for social and cultural and emotional nuances in the feedback process that provided an extra level of equitable engagement with various residents. And I really want to thank you for this effort. It was really outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you for your engagement and for your comments tonight. Appreciate it. We will now open it up for testimony. I will be calling up those present in person first, 2 at a time, and then we will proceed with the testifiers that are joining us online. So up first, I have Scott Goodman, Lydia Koroshenkik. Please come forward.
Chair O'Meara, while we wait for the speakers to come, did you want to mention what the speaking time limit is?
Yes, I will. Thank you. So 3 minutes for your public testimony. We do have the lights up here. Green is when you are still good to go. Yellow will flash at 30 seconds and red will flash when your time is up. Please do state your name for the record and we'll go ahead and get started with Scott. Welcome.
Can you all hear me? Hi, Scott Goodman. I'd like to talk about the Lower Southeast Rising Area Plan from 3 perspectives: the idealistic, professional, and the personal. First, idealistically, I graduated from the Portland State University Masters of Urban and Regional Planning program, class of 2022. Woot. That's right, I'm fresh out of the halls of lofty and idealistic academia. During my time in the program, we studied the freshest literature on creating sustainable and equitable cities, which involves a lot of density, walkability, and access. The Lower Southeast Rising Area Plan is like a page right out of my textbook. As a housing enthusiast, I joined the board of directors with Rose CDC, a nonprofit working on affordable housing in this very area. Building affordable housing and paying competitive wages to retain staff is like trying to juggle flaming swords. We need all the support we can get for affordable housing, and increasing the amount of market rate housing can help alleviate the strain, allowing greater density like this plan calls for. Professionally, I work for Echo Northwest, where I focus mostly on regional housing issues, mainly in Oregon and Washington. I look at the numbers and hear the heart-wrenching stories of housing vulnerability and homelessness. And one thing is clear, the rent is too damn high. Governor Kotek's goal of producing 36,000 housing units annually is more than necessary, and the Lower Southeast Rising Plan is an example of how local action can help in the statewide and national crisis. Refreshingly, we've seen little not-in-my-backyard opposition to this, partly because of the overall lower income levels of folks in this area, but also because everyday folks understand just how dire our housing crisis has become. And now, on the personal level. I'm a new parent. My son, Arlo Rene, was born less than 4 months ago. That changed everything for me. I'm wondering what the housing situation will be like for him when he's older. Have I done my part to secure his housing stability? Have you? I moved to Brentwood Darlington about a decade ago because it was affordable, and I'm committed to making this neighborhood livable for Arlo and his future classmates. This plan is downright progressive, and while we'll need more, it's a step in the right direction. When I first moved here, folks complained about the gravel road as a sign of the city's neglect. Fast forward to today, and many of those unimproved roads are now cherished as walkability assets that prioritize the human scale over cars. They help with stormwater drainage, something asphalt doesn't. We've taken matters into our own hands with a local project called Brentstock Incubators, working on unimproved rights-of-way to remove invasive species like tree of heaven and Himalayan blackberries and replace them with natives, beneficials, paths, and benches. It's this local, adaptive thinking that makes our neighborhood great. And we'd sure appreciate some extra support from the city to keep the area growing in a sustainable and equitable manner. We might be pretty far south, but we've got a name, we've got an identity, and we've got a vision. So here's to hoping this plan can set an example and a precedent for other neighborhood areas as well. Thank you for your time, consideration, and work.
Thank you. Lydia, go ahead.
All right. Hi, my name is Lydia. So when I first saw the notice, I was confused and didn't understand why this area was even chosen for rezoning. After looking at my neighbors, I understood that many of them were older people who couldn't fight this. My elderly neighbor who lived behind us had our property for majority of her life. They are homeowners who invested their life into their house financially, emotionally, and physically. With the criminal rise in 82nd, having hundreds of new families will cause it to rise even more. Taking away a homeowner's rights to their own property is disgusting. I hope this will not go through. If it does, then all prices on housing will drop, leaving all the past efforts that homeowners put into their housing just go to waste. Where is the American dream of a white picket fence? This is being taken away by this plan. There's a huge reason why people aren't happy with this Portland. This Portland is taking away homeowners' rights to their own property. If you want to save this Portland, you are dooming it. You will raise crime, unhappiness will ruin the American dream in Portland. The streets are tiny in scale, and there isn't enough parking spaces right now. What will happen when apartments are built? They will just lead into car break-ins, and currently you're just taking away this dream. And overall, having 500 to 1,500 people voting on something for that affects 15,000 people is quite an overgeneralization. Brentwood-Darlington is mostly a suburban place. The businesses in place aren't successful because we don't want them to be. If people want nightlife like bars and stores, move to a street where there is present. But if taken into consideration, the homeowners who are in Hawthorne aren't happy with that. When I called Bill Cunningham, which I appreciate him talking to me about this matter, said there were many people who wanted this, yet I'm not sure. Small 1,500 square feet businesses is what people wanted when answering ambiguous questions. He said that there were announcements, mailings about these notices and such, yet I can't recall seeing those at all. I almost missed this notice about the development because of how it looked like. If you're talking about someone's property, have it in a white envelope with red print that says important, this may affect your property. Instead, there was an emphasis on aesthetics. Your survey only wants to show how it improved the area by having nightlife. This will only lead to chaos and will drive people away. Here I personally border Clackamas County. All the nearest big stores, hospitals are going to be in Clackamas County. They are already overflooded, but yet with this, it's going to be even more flooded. We will see stores most likely close the next few years afterwards. The main points Bill Cunningham told me was, we're not making you do anything yet. What do you mean by yet? What will happen to my neighborhood? Another one was, nothing will very much change. Is this why there's a 5 to 10 year plan about how this neighborhood will look like? You are causing people to move out. In other words, you're causing gentrification. Yet the small business that you want to bring up won't help issues like grocery stores or hospitals. You will be spending millions of dollars on this plan that will cause people to struggle with parking spots, break-ins that police can't help, chaos, gun violence, which will result in people moving out, and then more buildings are built from that. We see how on Hawthorne and other streets that this plan strives to become causes more of its homeowners to smudge dog poop on people's cars. So what would be achieved with this having small stores that want to improve people's lives? Spend this money on building a hospital in Portland, big grocery stores, not small coffee shops. Don't doom this neighborhood to look hippie. Leave it to downtown Portland. There are multiple vacant places for this.
Thank you for your testimony. Calling up next, B. Lake and Pamela Hodge. But I think, Pamela, are you wanting to testify again? Okay. So B. Lake and Masayo Yamamoto.
Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Apologies, I might not have quite as polished of a presentation. I was trying to keep pace with new information as I was presented with it in this meeting. First, I'd like to specify that I'm speaking about the upzoning change between 72nd and 82nd and Flavel and Lambert. That is my neighborhood. First off, I do want to echo the realization that seems to be lacking in the description of a lack of services that we are in my neighborhood, approximately 3 blocks north of the Clackamas County line, and access to services could be greatly improved simply by pedestrian easement. If I could walk through the high-density housing development just on the other side of Johnson Creek, and not encounter a large fence between me and Fred Meyer, I would be able to walk to Fred Meyer in about 3 minutes. That being said, it seems like it is the effort for profit-seeking high-density ownership that is currently making services less accessible in this neighborhood. A lack of services, well, sorry, I already said that part. Affordable ownership, moreover, is not the enemy of affordable rental. It seems like I'm hearing a lot of discussion in this plan about the idea that there needs to be rentals. And for our neighborhood, lower Southeast Rising plans identify it as having higher diversity than Portland on the whole, and higher homeownership, and being more affordable than Portland on the whole, and yet somehow addresses the fact that there is a higher percentage of homeownership and a lower availability of rentals as an equity issue. So what I hear is a plan that says, we have found a neighborhood that is more diverse on the whole, more affordable on the whole, and has higher homeownership on the whole than the rest of Portland. And that is an equity issue, and we intend to develop it in the way that has brought the rest of Portland to be less equitable and less affordable and have less homeownership. Moreover, this erases the role of, as I already said, profit-seeking developers and property management companies, which, if the neighborhood that is being discussed, if the upzoning that is currently proposed for my neighborhood existed, my partner and I would not have been able to purchase our home. We would have had no chance to compete with out-of-state landlords who want to buy up large properties and maximize the number of occupancies on them. So you're identifying at-risk housing as the rental properties and mobile home parks, and neglecting to consider that we are a vulnerable neighborhood, and we are at risk of displacement if this is we're not going to continue to be the kind of affordable neighborhood that this is apparently prioritizing.
Thank you for your testimony. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Masayo Yamamoto. Can you hear me?
Press the button on your mic to make sure that's on and pull it forward. There should be a red light that comes on. Sometimes they're a little hard to see. Go ahead and test.
My name is Masayo Yamamoto.
We can hear you.
I've been
Thank you.
resident there about over a decade. So a decade ago, the city implemented tax abatement on this neighborhood to assist new single-family homeowners and foster a strong community. This plan provided opportunities for minority households to build wealth through home ownership. I believe this proposal contradicts the city's intention from a decade ago. The original incentive was the opportunity for lower income and minority residents to build a new life. Why is the city emphasizing a new business and a multi-level housing development within these residential zones? Furthermore, the current CM1 zones in this area remain underutilized. Why not focus on improving CM1 zones which are not in use rather than overhauling the entire neighborhood, driving out the residents that were brought in over 10 years ago? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our last person signed up for in-person testimony is Machu Williams. Welcome, and please state your name for the record.
Hey, sorry, excuse me. Good evening, Machu Williams. It's been a while since I've been here. Glad to see you all tonight. Good evening, Portland Planning Commission. I'm before you today as a resident of the Lower Southeast Area Plan area. I'm speaking solely from my own experience and on behalf of a group. This process has been a joy to watch over the years, including like the community advocacy, the petitioning electeds, and just seeing it come to fruition. And for some of us in the community, this has been decades. So it is a long time coming. and the amount of outreach, the community input is reflected in the plan before you today, while also providing community stability, which is enormous to this area. It's diverse, it continues to be one of the more affordable parts of Portland, and those efforts are key to making this plan succeed. So also to that end, I just want to commend the team for the outreach, particularly with the Partnership Latino Network and the personal mailers. I still have mine on my desk. I look at it every day. So just please do that again. And the Portland Map It tool, what a great way to see the multiple perspectives on one given geographic area. Please bring that back in future planning efforts. It was such a joy to review those input in real time. So I also want to emphasize that this plan, it balances the needs of services with city needs as well as community concerns amid an uncertain future. So having lived along several corridors throughout Portland, I can attest to the immense convenience of walking out your front door, getting onto the bus, and walking to like a coffee shop. So I hope that that opportunity is increased to more people as Portland continues to grow. And this plan reflects that. However, I would just encourage that it go further. The Centers of Corridor scenario brought up earlier has the majority of support. And I think it demonstrates a widespread understanding for the need for change and community stability at the same time. To that end, I would just encourage the Planning Commission to advance a plan that increases zoning, housing, and business opportunities throughout the area, particularly where neighborhood greenways intersect with corridors, as well as expansion of multifamily housing zoning up to a block out from transit, such as 72nd, Woodstock, 52nd. Currently, it ends about half a block out in many places outside of the center's nodes. So some of my favorite experiences have been walking out from an apartment a block off these main corridors. It offers the sense of community. It offers peace and quiet away from the main roadways, as well as convenient access to services. And so I hope that these historic anomalies are increased in this planning effort, and we increase these opportunities throughout the neighborhood for both current and future residents. And I'll just thank you all for your time and consideration, just for, again, the team's work that went into the outreach of the development plan before you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now proceed to those joining us online. I have up first Katie Tam, and then following Katie, Roy Dixon.
They're not.
Okay, proceeding down the list, Nick Savi, following Nick, Elaine Kinchin.
So, Elaine Kinchin is the only one that's. Kinchin is the only one.
Elaine is there?
Yeah.
Okay. Elaine Kinchin. Welcome. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Elaine Kinchin, and I am.
Oh, Elaine, I think we may have lost connection. That's the last person.
Yeah, it's the only person that's.
Chair O'Meara, Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. Maybe we can give it a moment, but also perhaps we could just ask if there's anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak.
Great. Okay. Anyone else in the audience who would like to come up and testify, please come forward. Push the button and say your name for the record.
Okay, Jessica. My name is Jessica, and I am a homeowner
on the 7400 block of Southeast 72nd. Next door neighbor to these proposals, I'm in the 6% that would be affected most. I want to share my journey of home ownership. I worked hard to do everything right. I got my first job at 14. I worked all through high school. I went to a state college. I worked 3 jobs at once. I graduated on a Friday and I started my first job on the following Monday out of college. For more than a decade, I worked hard and I sacrificed and I saved. I rented rooms and I lived in studio apartments. And for 3 years, I lived in 150 square feet and I saved. In 2020, I had the chance to put my hard work and savings to use and buy a house. I looked at dozens, I made offers, I was beat out by cash offers, and then I saw the home on 72nd and I loved it, and I was elated when my offer was accepted. It's not that I don't advocate for affordable housing. As a child, my mom and I lived in subsidized housing. We utilized WIC and food stamps. My mom also instilled in me the work ethic and the savings habits to let me buy my first home. For me, this humble single-family home is affordable housing. So to get a letter in the mail to say that my home property value may be affected by Southeast Rising was a gut punch. I do see opportunity for multifamily apartments 10 blocks to the east, where Southeast 82nd is brimming with empty car lots and abandoned buildings. It's a main thoroughfare closer to public transit, bus lines, the MAX, and the Springwater Corridor. But I would ask that you would leave our neighborhood intact. So, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. It looks like we do have Elaine Kinchin back online. Elaine, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am speaking because I am also a resident of the proposed change neighborhood along Lambert. And my partner and I bought a house in this neighborhood because it was a place in Portland where there were large lots and a neighborhood feeling that was affordable. We similarly looked all over Portland, put in offers on 11 places, and being able to be in a neighborhood where we were able to have a large yard was actually something that was highly important to us. Our neighborhood has an incredibly rural feel, which is rare to be able to still find in Portland. Many of our neighbors raise animals, and it has a lovely thing. To consider these lots underutilized when we are in an incredibly diverse neighborhood of lots of different people being able to live their lives in a lot of different ways feels really disingenuous. Many of the things in it saying that they are adding lots of green space feels a little bit strange, considering that those things were already identified as green space and have been for the past 4 years that we've been in this neighborhood. And many of the traffic issues that are cited along Lambert come from changes to commercial things that are already on the street, because the only real traffic issues that we have is the fact that there's an auto shop whose owners drag race cars down the road. We have so many walkable services close to us in Clackamas that having a new center be within walking distance to the only other center seems a little bit strange when there's so much of Brentwood Darlington that doesn't have other areas. Since we've moved here, because we have one of those underutilized properties, I get calls on a weekly basis for people trying to buy houses. And for a plan that is designed to try to keep residents in the neighborhood and increase the long-term viability of a neighborhood, having predatory calls from property development agencies is not going to keep long-term residents in the neighborhood. Our neighborhood is filled with people who are elderly and families that have been here for a long time. And to see all of those houses that will eventually go up for sale to be bought by predatory lending companies and become apartments really doesn't seem like something that's going to keep the character of the neighborhood or increase the residents. Honestly, if you want to do something that would increase the neighborhood feeling or the traffic safety, you could put a speed bump on the road, make a school zone that extends for more than half a block, because I think we have one of the smallest school zones for having a neighborhood elementary school in the entire area. And nothing in this plan really speaks to how that's going to be sustained with a large amount of additional development right around the 72nd and Flavel area. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I believe that concludes the testimony for this evening. Did we get Nick, Savi, or any of the other online testifiers back on? Okay. So I will now be closing the written and oral testimony for this project, and I will invite Bill and Shane back up. And we'll proceed with a round robin of comments. I know this is continuing on for a work session, so we will have more opportunity to ask questions. So let's go ahead and proceed with round robin. And turning on my attention to my online commissioners, is there anyone online that would like to kick us off? Okay. Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
I'll have Eli start. I feel like I've spoken.
Okay, Commissioner Spivak.
I've spoken as well. I was just talking to my 10-year-old trying to go to sleep. So I will speak to this room. Thanks so much for the testimony, everyone who stayed and showed your patience. I think this may be a lesson for us to schedule this earlier in our agenda when we have the opportunity. I came into this project expecting to see if staff could go further than they did in terms of land use changes. I don't feel that way now. I feel like looking at the map, I think that some of the changes proposed make a lot of sense to me in terms of creating the opportunity for more walkable lifestyles for residents, and that does take some more homes. And I think that the homes are fairly concentrated in relatively thin strips and centers as proposed, and it may take a long time before they actually happen. But to go further than this, I think would be a concern, because I think that if you look further west and north from this southeast area, you see a lot of zoning that's fairly similar to what we see here. And the concern I have is that Portland really needs to bring some of those areas up to allow more housing first before this area. So I'd like to see more of that in the future. That way, because a lot of times displacement in Portland happens as people are shopping for a home closer in, they can't find it, so they move out further afield, which might be to southeast Portland in this area, and then displace someone who's already there. So I'm trying to look for more capacity closer in so that there's less pressure on this area. But I think that this is I don't have concerns with this plan at this point, but I think it's something I'm never shy about throwing it out there as an option. But thank you for the staff to put this project together and for the long community engagement process to refine it. And I also am cheered to see a little CR zoning, which is one of my favorite zones, sort of like commercial size building, commercial use in a residential size building, which I think is very in keeping and a great way to preserve legal use for at least a couple of the buildings in this area that have been commercial use for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you to all of the testifiers for your patience and for showing up this evening. It was great to hear from so many people. There were a couple of themes that I'm interested in discussing more, and I know that we don't have a ton of time, so I'll just kind of throw out what those are, and I think we can follow up with them at our next work session. Some of the prevailing topics from the written testimony in particular were traffic safety, and also just highlighting the long history of neglect or unfulfilled promises in this area, and a sense of urgency that some of the traffic safety issues be remediated in the short term. There were a lot of specific intersections and problem areas that were cited, as well as just the general prevalence of neighborhood streets being used as thoroughfares as a result of development on Foster and some of the other busier streets. And so I'm curious to hear and learn a little bit more about the traffic calming measures. And then tonight, just hearing about this issue of home ownership and preserving affordability. I think the plan does a good job of addressing that at the mobile home park and existing apartment scale, but just building on the housing needs analysis conversation that we had earlier, there really is a need for us to preserve home ownership opportunities as well. And I'd really like to have more of a discussion about what that could look like here. And then lastly, I'm curious to just better understand the vision for 72nd and Flavel. I also had questions about what the vision for that intersection really is, just with some of the existing context, the school being right there, and then also the interest in preserving the mobile home park, which I think is admirable in its intention, but I'm also wondering how that works with the increased density that we're hoping to see there at the same time, as well as the grocery store, and whether or not preserving that grocery outlet is important, or if it was redeveloped into something that didn't include a grocery store, what the neighborhood would have to say about that. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Routh.
Thank you. I want to echo also thank you to everyone who testified here in person, and also written testimony. There's been a lot coming in, so really appreciate everyone's thoughts. Most of mine have been echoed previously by commissioners. I did have a couple of questions, maybe granular later. I know that we're batching into the TSP, or the transportation system plan, forgive me. But curious if the local street pavement will be a full build, and whether that includes sidewalks, because I know like walkability and particularly safe routes to school was mentioned a number of times. And Nick Stovey, who wasn't able to be here, but in his written testimony mentioned an unaddressed industrial property right near the spring water, and whether that needed to be incorporated into this project. So curious about that. And also there were a couple of properties moving to an open space designation that both Parks and BES mentioned, and wanted to make sure that was reflected in ours. And generally, to Commissioner Thompson's point, I believe the manufactured dwelling parks have actually been spot zoned, so those have an overlay, and that was a previous from some years ago. I got to canvass all of those people, which was fun some years ago, to do so that even if those parks were sold, that could not be converted, that would remain as a manufactured dwelling park. I am curious about what, I know that Bill, you talked about, sorry, and then I will stop. This is my last. You mentioned on the STAR properties that are unsubsidized affordable housing that weren't included in this project, but curious, like what is the catchment area of potential impacts? Because I think unsubsidized affordable housing is precious and precarious, and we just want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to keep displacement at bay. Thank you.
Thank you. And transitioning to in-person commissioners, Commissioner Lang, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and sharing your thoughts. And thank you for serving 2 years on an advisory committee. That's 2 years I know well about it. You'll never get it back. Appreciate everyone's effort and expressing themselves. I used to spend a lot of time in that area, and I haven't been there in a long, long time. And I grew up in an area much like that, unincorporated, later incorporated. So I got a feel for what's going on there. I get excited about the potential for what could happen there, but at the same time, there's some other considerations, obviously, that have to be looked at and understood, at least by me. I need to understand it a little further to make any final judgment on what the plan is and where it's going. But it's exciting to see that there's a potential in this area for for improvement in walkability and transit, and also for small businesses. So I want to keep an open mind and keep looking at the rest of the testimony that I haven't had a chance to read yet. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pouncil.
Yes, I would like to echo Commissioner Lang's perspective and continual inquiry as well. But I do appreciate the community involvement that has been involved here. It's, from my perspective, I think it's a stellar job. So keep it up, and do better too. So thanks a lot.
Commissioner Patel.
Hey everyone. Like all the commissioners said prior to me, I want to first thank everyone for their patience. I know it's late in the evening, so really thank you all for testifying here today. And staff, want to also say thank you for creating an expansive engagement process with the community early on. I think this started around 2021, so it's been a multi-year process. As in terms of the plan, I think it really addresses a historic lack of investment in the lower Southeast. I'm born and raised in Southeast 82nd, along Hallgate, and I go around this area pretty often visiting family and friends, so I'm very familiar with this area. And so I think creating a more complete neighborhoods across Portland is a priority, and this plan appears to do a good job with expanding housing opportunities with adjacency to transit, amenities, and commercial services. So all in all, for now, as other commissioners have mentioned, I'd like to review more comments thoroughly, but I think on balance, this plan addresses critical issues that were ongoing in the lower Southeast, and I think it's a movement in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair O'Meara. For the record, I want to thank everyone, whether you're just coming tonight and participating maybe for the first time, or you've been in this process for several years. This is really important work, and appreciate everyone coming and expressing your opinions. Community planning is very complicated, and it is an exercise in trying to balance many different priorities, perspectives, and really looking to the future in a way that looks for prioritizing safety, access to services, but also really does need to be grounded in keeping folks stable in their community, right? So I really appreciate all of the comments around how can we look to the plan to really emphasize that community stability, and echo the comments around how do we define underutilization, that how we exist in neighborhoods and communities is different for all of us. So also definitely hear that statement as well. As someone that has lived in the area since 2012, I want to really escalate the safety needs for pedestrians. There is a lot of walking happening in Brentwood, Darlington. It is an amazing community in terms of folks out on bikes and all sorts of wheels, right? But also trying to get around to school, to grocery outlet. Love grocery outlet. Please, let's keep it there. That's my one PSA. And the other amenities that do exist. So I think some of my questions, and again, we don't have time tonight, is how do we prioritize investments on the transportation side? I was curious, for the plan study, there's a really strong focus on Brentwood, Darlington. When we look at the transportation investments, that boundary grows then to include some of the other surrounding streets. So I want to understand how do we prioritize those investments. As we've all acknowledged, Brentwood Darlington has really been an underinvestment neighborhood in our city. So thank you all again, and looking forward to future meetings and the upcoming work session to explore further what's being presented in this plan, have more dialogue, and take questions from commissioners. And with that, I think we can adjourn the meeting tonight. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.